Good morning. It's just fabulous to be together and welcome each and every one of your sweet hearts, those of you in the sanctuary and those of you online. I was touched by a couple of words in Mark's opening inspiration. He talked about new energy filling us. And those of you who see me on a more frequent basis, you know that one of my favorite one-liners is to say, I'm so excited. I am so excited. And I am excited to be here. And I'm grateful that Mark inspired all of us with the idea that new energy fills us all when we open to receive it. So guess what? You're in luck today. Whether this is your first time or not, it happens to be a metaphysics day where we're going to look in depth at a few stanzas. And the other thing is that I need to practice my joke telling. And since the talk title for today deals with our ability to discern the difference between the voice of the ego, or whatever you call that thing that represents separation from source. So, there's lots of names for it. They used to call it Satan and the devil, and then Carl Jung called it the shadow. For me, it just is that part of me, the small s self, that sometimes forgets about my oneness. And so I'll be referring to that part that each of us has some awareness of as the ego. But first, kind of acknowledging that this darkness shows up in all of us sometimes. Here's my joke, the one I really enjoyed this morning from my favorite, Seinfeld. So he asks a question, which to me is always entertaining. He says, so do the security guards in art museums ever really stop anybody from taking paintings? I mean, are they going up to the thieves and saying, hey, where do you think you're going with that? Or, hey, come over here. Give me that Cézanne. I mean, look at the job that this man is hired to do. He's getting $5 an hour to protect millions of dollars of priceless art. And with what? He's got a light mocha brown uniform and a USA Today. This is all he's got. I mean, the crooks must look at this guy and go, all right, all we got to do is get past the folding chair, the thermos of coffee, and we got a Rembrandt. So, as you know, I really enjoy Seinfeld's perception of the minutiae of life. And we will get into the minutiae somewhat today as we explore how astute we might be at recognizing the voice of the small self versus the voice for God. I have trained myself, and I share this with you, I have trained myself to refer to it as the voice for God, as opposed to the perhaps overworked voice of God. Those two prepositions make a huge difference in my life, not only because I'm a language fanatic, but more so because of the implication in those words. For me, the voice of God could come from out there somewhere. But once I'm aware of God in me, then I listen for the voice for God. Because in its origination, the word for carries the weight of on behalf of or representing. And so the voice that I seek to create internal space so that I might hear is the voice that is representing not some God, out there. It is speaking on behalf of the God that is me. The God that is me. And so the very first time that I encountered an assignment on metaphysics, it's interesting that it asked that I understand the two powers that we study in unity traditionally of the 12 powers in the summer. And those are the powers of will and understanding. And so I share with you now the scripture that has inspired what I'm supposed to learn this morning. And I'm humbled and privileged to share with you a reading from Genesis, the first book of Genesis, verses 3 through 31. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament and divided the waters, those that were under the firmament from the waters that were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament sky. And there was evening and morning and the second day. And God said, "Let the waters that are under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation, the herb yielding seed after its kind, and the fruit trees yielding fruit after its kind." And the earth brought forth vegetation, the herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree bearing fruit, wherein is its seed after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven, separating day from night. And let those be signs for years, seasons, and days. And let them be lights in the firmament of heaven to give light to the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the smaller light to rule the night, and the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and night, and to separate the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let fowl fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heaven." And God created great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let fowl multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning and the fifth day. God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle and everything that creeps on the earth after its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the cattle, the wild beasts, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them and blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Behold, I have given you every herb yielding seed on the face of the earth and every tree which yields fruit. To you it shall be for food, and to every beast of the earth and bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. And God saw that everything that he had made was very good. And there was evening and morning and the sixth day. And on the sixth day, the heavens and the earth were finished. And God finished his works and rested on the seventh day from all of his works which he had made, blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his works which were created and made. We have here one of the most riveting stories that has informed the imagination, and we might say informed ways to misinterpret and misunderstand what is really a very beautiful metaphor for creation. So what I would like to do is to offer up in a few minutes the metaphysical understanding that I've arrived at this week of the story of how each one of us is creating our reality based on the blueprint or the pattern interpreted from the first creation story. And I would like to share with you how dramatically my applying the symbolism in that story to my life, how dramatically it differs now compared to the first time in 1998 when I was asked to write a blueprint explaining what those symbols really might represent for me. This is a wonderful way that I take a kind of progress report on how I'm doing in my spiritual aspirations, to notice that what I did with that blueprint, whatever that is, a number of years ago in 1998 is very different from what I am seeking to create, as some of you hear me say, every 60 seconds. So all I really breathe into is the creation of my life, breath by breath, every 60 seconds. And what I'm applying that blueprint to today is markedly different than what I was applying it to then. So before we look at those symbols and apply them to something that you are seeking to create, let me just say that the only thing I ever want to create at this time in my life is greater awareness of my inseparability from Source, and of awareness as well, because I'm responsible for my consciousness. So with the desire, with the intention to use a blueprint to stay aware of my oneness with Source, comes also the responsibility of being the watchman of my consciousness for other things. Whether it's a thief, like the one Seinfeld pokes fun at in the museum, or a thief that comes in the night or day in the form of ego to either threaten my peace or to hook me through fear into believing something that is not true, because it is not real. All that is true and is real is whatever endures eternally. And we know that the only thing that endures eternally is love. But folks, we live in a world of permanence. We live in a world of appearances where it becomes potentially very seductive to forget that it's all impermanent. I suppose at this moment in the unfoldment of my consciousness, if you were to ask me to capture in a word where my focus is in my prayer life, in my 60 seconds at a time creating peace, I would say that my focus is on the impermanence of all of this out here. And some of you have heard me say that the more I laugh these days at all the crazy ways that impermanence can act up, I believe that laughter leads to enlightenment. And I have not traditionally done a lot of laughing in my life. So as I focus on impermanence, I learn to laugh. So let me just share with you what I live from when it comes to the ego showing up to convince me that something has any kind of permanence when it doesn't. And it's my personal theory, developed roughly over the last 25 years of a specific study on the ego. It's my theory that just as each one of us is an individual expression of the divine light, the beauty of personality, the beauty of how we show up in the world, just as that's very unique, specific, and individual, my observation is that the way that my ego shows up to tempt me away from truth may be very different from how your ego seduces you. And this is, of course, this fact arises because of a lot of things: early programming, religiosity. Certainly some of us have been more toxified by religiosity than others, and we give thanks for that because it was part, in my case, of what brought me to truth. So let me tell you in short the ways that I recognize the voice of the ego versus the voice for God. Let me stop there and just repeat those prepositions. I even call it the voice of the ego versus the voice for God, which is always working on my behalf when I'm open and receptive. So here's what the ego or the flesh part of us or the small self, whatever you call it, the part of us that's separated. Here's how I recognize its voice. It sounds very intelligent. It sounds very intellectual. It shows up knowing what patterns of fear I have most been working on in my life and attempts to hook or seduce me into believing that those impermanent things, whatever they are, you choose yours. For about 20 years, mine was a belief in lack. So we can heal these things, whether it's not feeling safe in the world. That was another pattern of mine where I was not suspicious. I was just fearful of being in the world. And so the ego really thrives on whatever my pattern of fear is that I'm seeking to finally release. So I need to be aware of this. I need to know that the ego is on the scene whenever I feel guilty whenever I feel like persecuting myself, whenever I feel that there's force converging on me as opposed to power rising from within me. The voice for God in me is not chaotic. It's not forceful. It's not about guilt, and it has nothing to do with fear. My closest articulation of how I recognize the voice for God in me is to say that it's waiting. The voice that speaks on behalf of my God self is waiting for me to clear, purify my withinness. When I can present my consciousness cleared, purified of any of those other things you just heard me say, then there will be light. Then I am allowing there to be light in my consciousness. And then the voice of God might be a breeze. This morning, I'm pretty sure it was a squirrel outside, and I'll tell you why, because I was sitting very still and I could hear something that was like clanging of metal in the backyard. So whereas the voice of ego might have shown up to terrorize me about what was going on back there, because some of you will remember with me and for me that 2.5 years ago in the night, my garage was broken into, but none of that came up. Instead, I heard the metal clanging and I thought, wow, I'm listening for the voice for God. And what is that sound? And I went to the window, and I have a metallic stand that I put laundry out on. And there was a squirrel doing gymnastics on that laundry rack. You think that wasn't the joy of God expressing in me? So I opened the window and I said, hello, buddy. Thank you for reminding me to be playful. And so the voice for God in us, for us, manifests in whatever way we are receptive to when we clear our consciousness. It can be a breeze that is moving the leaves on the hibiscus trees outside. It can be a color that floods the consciousness with its beauty suddenly. All of this represents the voice for God in me when I have cleared my consciousness of the small self. Let me just close this part of my sharing to tell you that the thing about the ego is that it is a function of our post-separation self. So whether we're talking about feeling separate from God individually, because those fears can still seduce us, and because we're not creating an inner vacuum for only love, the ego really arises and is the questioning aspect of the post-separation self. I remember teaching this concept for years and years, and at one point there was a gentleman who was coming to class, and every week he would say, well, why do we have the ego? And God bless you, George, wherever you are, because at the time, I just didn't know what to say. So the teacher in me just knew to say, well, I don't know. I don't know, George, like work it out. We're all working our own stuff out. I can't tell you why we have an ego. Why do we need an ego if we're children of God? So for me, herein lies the answer. We do have a personality. We do have permanence that seems permanent in this beautiful spacesuit that we travel in. But if we can understand that the ego is the questioning aspect of the post-separation self, it doesn't matter if you think of the separation of all of humanity as represented by the Garden of Eden, or if you think of the separated self as an individual of experience of how long it takes each one of us to concentrate on what has been created in us rather than what we have made by looking without and believing that all of this is permanent. While the ego is capable of questioning and asking endless questions, which is another way that I know I'm trapped in its little web, is if a committee takes place in my head of trying to answer all these questions. It's capable of answering questions, but the ego is not capable of perceiving meaningful answers, because meaningful answers would involve knowledge and cannot be perceived. Soon as we say perception, I think of the filter of judgment. I'm in perception when I think I know. I have returned to the heart of God, and I've created a space to be one with the activity of grace, which is God in me, when I am not questioning, but when I am listening to the voice for God. I'm deciding in this moment that the metaphysical interpretation of what I call creation in consciousness, a blueprint for whatever we want to create, is going to be divided in two. And so, having understood that there are 7 days of creation, I will take us as far as day 4, because the symbols for our individual powers of will and understanding are contained in the imagery of the 4th day of creation. And then, guess what? Next Sunday, together, we can explore days 5, 6, and 7. What is it that I want to create? I suppose that is really the question that arises out of my message for me this morning. And certainly I invite you to ask that question if you so choose. What is it that I want to create? I think you heard me say in my introduction that my answer all week has resonated in me as I want the peace of God. I want consciousness of my inseparability from God so that I can recognize the temptations that show up to convince me otherwise. So that's step 1 in metaphysically interpreting the 7 days of creation, is acknowledging that I am a co-creator with God. And if I am listening to the voice for God, I am creating in alignment with God or love, and that my other choice is part of my free will, and this is the power in August, is will. I may also be consciously or unconsciously listening to the voice of ego, which is always functioning from fear. So day 1, in creating what you've decided that you want, what I do is I sit and know the truth that the first step in this creation process is to allow and to invite the light of my Christ mind to illumine me. So day 1 of the Genesis creation story, which reads, "Let there be light," metaphysically understood and interpreted for me, for my life, is to sit and consciously clear the fear, not even clutch or grasp what it is that I want. I just shared with you that what I want above all is an awareness that is ever expanding of the impermanence of everything out here and of my inseparability from God. Let me just tell you quickly while it rises in me. When I first wrote this paper, Creationism in Consciousness, an interpretation of Genesis 1 through 31, I was suffering from generational belief in not enough. Okay. So when I came to Unity, I had already had a powerful experience of physical healing And my next assignment was to truly delve into my belief in lack, limitation, my belief in something out here being my source, whether it was the security of my job or, my paycheck, whatever. So you hear that what I was seeking to create in 1998 was a demonstration of opulence, of abundance, of a new job, of supply, blah, blah, blah. Imagine the power that we can access when we witness our own journey over however long it takes to go, wow, I healed that. I don't even want to demonstrate or manifest anything in the outer other than an awareness that it's impermanent. So that's my interpretation of step 1. Step 2, which says, let there be a firmament. The solidity of the firmament represents, yes, the ground, the earth. So what am I grounded in? I am grounded in absolute faith, absolute trust in something that is permanent and that is not obtainable in the world. So when I can put my absolute faith in the firmament of my oneness with God, then I bring an attitude of trusting, of believing, of knowing with an inner conviction that the right and desired outcome of what I've decided I'd like to demonstrate is mine by divine inheritance. Step 3, let the waters be gathered together in one place and let the dry land appear. So the place is a symbol of the mind and the dry land is the manifestation in the outer. So when I sit and I clear my consciousness to become a vacuum for the voice for God, I allow any ideas to clearly take place in my imagination so I can visualize desired results in the external. How do I do this? By visualizing the peace, the oneness that is my current desire to create. And again, I hope you are hearing this is a blueprint for creationism in consciousness. So whatever it is that you are seeking to create, these 4 steps that we're covering today will apply. Step 4 is let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. What are these 2 lights? Actually, symbolically, metaphysically interpreted, the 2 lights are the faculties, the 12 powers as will and understanding. So my will must run like a train on the track of understanding. I will not be rushed into any hasty decision or action. I will sit and wait. For when I wait, I am open, receptive to hearing the voice for God. So according to some sources, today is Charles Fillmore's birthday. Yay, happy birthday, Charles. And so as a way of paying tribute to one of our co-founders, I would like to share with you in closing and certainly at fellowship, if you have any questions about that blueprint and how to create what it is that you've decided you want, you can bring those questions, please, there. I'm just going to leave at day 4 for today because it emphasizes that I can will to listen to the voice of ego every 60 seconds. What am I listening to? Am I creating a belief in what is permanent as opposed to being seduced by what is impermanent? So there, we are complete with day 4 of creation. And I would just like to pay tribute by quoting what I love about our unity philosophy for me is that it affords me great breadth and width of expanding my spiritual understanding and applying what I understand to my life. Charles' grandson, named for him, was the third CEO at Unity Village at the time, Unity headquarters. And he left us with a wonderful way to think about what is unity. And we come together every Sunday. We say that we're part of this philosophy. How are we doing in applying it to the next 60 seconds? That's what I ask myself. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of noise. And so here's what Charles' grandson wrote. He said, people ask me all the time, what is unity? What is it? And he said, really, we are a group of people that strive to do 4 things. And see if these resonate with you folks. We strive to be psychologically healthy. We strive to be scientifically sound. And we strive to challenge our intellects. And finally, and not least, we strive for what is spiritually satisfying. So may you go forth into the rest of this day psychologically healthy, renewed by that energy of life, founded in scientific principles, finding that your intellect is challenged by beauty or joy or nature, and above all, noticing that spiritually you are satisfied by an awareness of your inseparability from God. And I say thank you, God, as we move into a time of contemplation and introspection.